We will now discuss about Antarctica. In Antarctica, a continent which is nearly 4.3 times of Indian subcontinent, which is a land of extremes, one of the coldest land on Earth's surface, with a minus 89.2 degrees Celsius recorded at Vostok Station, which is a world record, which has the highest elevation on Earth's surface with an average elevation of 2,500 meters because of the thickness of the ice over the land. It's one of the windiest part of the Earth's surface with a wind of more than 200 meters per hour, including the blizzards. It's the driest Earth's surface. It's one of the desert, the polar desert, what we call, with an average precipitation less than 2 inches per year. And it's also the iciest part of the Earth's surface, where ice in some part of the Antarctica, the ice reaches nearly 4.7 kilometers. It's a huge pile of ice sheets. Antarctica, as you look at from the space, looks a beautiful white marble, of course huge in size, with a few speckles on it. They are nothing but actually the exposed part of the Antarctic surface, especially you can see the Transantarctic mountain all across, and also few mountains along the coast, which separates the West Antarctica from the East Antarctica. East Antarctica is the largest part and also the thickest of Antarctic ice sheet. West Antarctica consists a large area of ice shelves, which are floating bodies of ice. However, if you look at more carefully, more closely, more scientifically, what you see is something like this. Beautiful picture looking like a modern art, which shows the flow speed within Antarctica, which increases, stands still from some places to increases to as fast as 3 kilometers per year. And they also have very dendritic patterns. That means the ice is contributing to various of these ice shelves and flowing through that. So you can see some part of the Antarctica are flowing faster than the others. Most of them are along the ice shelves like Ross Ice Shelf, Ronne Ice Shelf and various other ice shelves. And these are the areas where Antarctica could lose mass. So it's very important to know this flow. So therefore, we know that Antarctica is not a very static body, it's a very dynamic body of on Earth's surface. And if you look even further from the up, Antarctica also have a large ocean surrounding it, what we call as Southern Ocean. And Antarctica is only, in fact, only one area where you have this Circumpolar Ocean existing, all along the Antarctica, and they encircle Antarctica, which divides the polar regions from the rest of the world, making Antarctica colder and colder. And Southern Ocean is also home to Earth's strongest ocean current, what we call actually Antarctic Circumpolar Current. And it's a primary location where ancient deep ocean water is upwelled to the surface. And ACCs, the eastward flow, is also driven by strong westerly winds that encircle Antarctic continent. And altogether, all these processes also lead Antarctica an important area to work, because Southern Ocean controls the natural release of carbon dioxide from the oceans. It helps to absorb the large amount of human impact or anthropogenic emissions of CO2. Nearly 40% of that is taken by Southern Ocean. And also it modulates the heat transport or heat flow around the globe. So that's why Southern Ocean and Antarctica is so important. If you look even more close, you'll come to know the global impact of Southern Ocean circulation. It is central to the global Thermohaline circulation, where the water masses are formed at the polar regions, as well as it spreads across the globe, and as well as the upwelling of water with the nutrient-rich water to the surface happens here. If you look here across this one, you can see a transect which shows how the actual water is living in Southern Ocean, with Antarctic bottom water in the bottom. Then you have this North Atlantic deep water which comes from the north and then mixes with the Antarctic water, forming the circumpolar deep water. Then we have this formation of this Antarctic circumpolar current, which is basically drives many of the currents there, and formation of water masses. Thus, Antarctica as well as Southern Ocean has a global significance, and it has a unique life which you would never see anywhere else. We typically view Earth as a temperate environment, but the 90% or 95% of the biosphere actually exists below 5 degrees Celsius temperature, like deep oceans, polar surface, polar ice caps, the permanently frozen land, what we call as a permafrost, and so on. So there is a large amount of life as well as biodiversity over there. And Antarctica do have extensive species diversity, including mammals, birds, invertebrates, but the dominant variations are the biodiversity what we can find at the microbial level. The microbial biodiversity is extensive and have a very significant role in the carbon cycling within Antarctica. Antarctica, as we see today, is a frozen land, a land with all covered by ice. However, Antarctica hasn't always been as cold as it is now. If you look at the geological history of Antarctica, about 200 million years ago, the Antarctic continental crust was joined with the South America, Africa, India and Australian continental plates, making up a large southern land what we call as the Gondwana land. Subsequently, the Gondwana land split apart to create Antarctica as a separate continent, and it moved further down south, and rest of the continent, like the plates like Indian plates, moved further north, finally touching at the Eurasian plate, and they all separated out. If you look the formation of Antarctic ice sheets, what we call as the making of Antarctic ice sheet, happened during Cenozoic era, starting from 65 million years before present. When many of the continents start moving away from the Gondwana land, the various processes which made this happen. The onset of Cenozoic cooling happened around 50 million years before present. It was exactly coinciding with the Indian continent, Indian plate meeting the Eurasian plate, where there was a sea called Tethys Sea was existing. It got closed. Then Himalaya started forming. With the formation or the uplift of Himalaya, the large amount of rock and soil material start uplifted. The weathering of which, the silicate weathering of these particular rocks, the silicate rocks, consumed a huge amount of carbon dioxide, leading to cooling, the global cooling at that time. That particular cooling was the reason how Antarctica started becoming cold. And thereafter, Antarctica has been consistently cooling. If you look at the graph, you can see that very clearly. The second major step of this cooling happened when the Antarctica got split, because the southern tip of South America was still joined with Antarctica. And when it got opened about 40 million years before present, the Drake Passage got opened and the initiation of Antarctic circumpolar current started. This Antarctic circumpolar current, which is the largest current over the Earth's surface now, made Antarctica an isolated land, completely isolated from the rest of the world, making it colder and colder. So therefore, Antarctica started becoming very cold, and it has been consistently cooling thereafter. With the closure of the Isthmus of Panama, these North America and South America got closed, which led to a stopping of a circulation on the equatorial region. That made even circulations are totally different from what we say it was previously, making Antarctica cooler and cooler. And during the Quaternary, which is about 2.5 million years before present, we have a series of these glacial interglacial cycles of cooling and warming, which we will see further in the next slide, where we can see a beautiful cycles when the Earth was cooler and then warmer. This cycle, which since about 1 million years before present, it had a consistent pacing about 100,000 years. At every 100,000 years, there is a glacial stage, it's a cold period, and then another 100,000 years there is a warm period. This has to do something with the astronomical forcing, what we call actually the Milankovitch cycles, which is related to the basic orbital system around the Earth, the entire solar system, orbital systems. And you can see that if you look at the carbon dioxide variations as you see in the ice core records, as well as temperature measured using oxygen isotope records of these ice cores, we can see that there is a consistent relationship with the CO2 as well as temperature. This is one compelling reason why people say that carbon dioxide increase is directly related to temperature. Throughout the past 800,000 years, that's the only available ice core record so far, we see that the CO2 varied between about 100 ppmv. The maximum was about say around 300 ppmv during the interglacial period. However, if you look at the last part of what we are going on now, since last few decades, the CO2 has reached about more than 400 ppmv, which is a steep increase compared to the typical less than 300 ppmv variations. This has implications. That's what we see actually as global warming. What is Antarctica's role other than what we see today? Because Antarctica covers completely with ice, about 98% with ice, and ice is highly reflecting. It's a white body compared to ocean or land, which are dark bodies or the black bodies. And because it's highly reflecting, it leads to the cooling, what we call actually is ice albedo effect. This Antarctica actually acts as a global thermostat. If you look at the figure, you can see that Antarctica reflects almost 90% of the radiations back compared to an ocean which absorbs about 90% of the radiations. So you can make out the difference actually why Antarctica, what role Antarctica could play in a global climate system. Not only just Antarctica's Antarctic surface, during winter the Antarctica nearly doubles by itself by freezing ice around the Antarctica, what we call actually the sea ice. The sea ice further extends the white surface. So you have a larger area which is basically supporting to have this reflection of solar light. Thus it increases the albedo effect. If you look at the Antarctic ice and its impact on sea level, it is one of the largest one it could happen ever. Antarctica having such a huge pile of ice sheet, as I discussed before, having an average thickness about 2.5 kilometer ice, which holds about 30 million cubic kilometer of ice, which is nearly about 80 to 90% of global fresh water. And this ice, if it melts, is enough to increase the sea level by about 60 meters. It can be very dramatic, and it's not been just an alarming statement. If you look at the graph here, we can make out the sea level has been increasing since the data available. The main contributor to that sea level had been Greenland, because Greenland is really warming faster. But Antarctica is picking up, and in the coming decades, Antarctica is going to contribute even higher and higher to the global sea level. So it has a very substantial role in our life, as well as how the Earth would sustain. When the sea ice forms around Antarctica, essentially salt gets rejected, because when ice forms, ice cannot have salt crystals in that. So when the ice gets rejected, that make the water below it even more denser. This dense water ultimately sink and forming what we call actually the global thermohaline circulation or global overturning circulation. It's a cold, dense water which plunges to the depth, making all this happen. And if you look at the figure here, you can make out it globally get distributed, because various currents and various systems, it ultimately reaches every part of the globe, and therefore controlling the global climate system. And even more importantly, the Southern Ocean, which surrounds the Antarctic continent, takes up nearly 40% of the global CO2 from the atmosphere. The Therefore, the anthropogenic impact of CO2 is reduced substantially by 1/3 of it actually has been taken directly by the Southern Ocean. If not for Southern Ocean, this world could have been totally different. It would have been a really warm world. Thus, it plays a vital role in global carbon cycle as well as climate. And unfortunately, Southern Ocean is no longer is the place where it can soak up every CO2 which we are releasing. As the globe is warming, Southern Ocean is also getting slightly warm. And its ability to take up more carbon dioxide is reduced because as it warms, it's unable to take up dissolve more carbon dioxide. So it could be very different in the coming decades as globe is getting warmer and warmer. Unfortunately, the Southern Ocean CO2 uptake could be reduced. That's going to be even more dramatic results. When we come back, we will discuss more how this Antarctica is behaving in a changing world. As the globe is warming, what is the response of Antarctica? We'll also discuss, more importantly, how it's going to be different than what we see today.